There's a handout that accompanied my talk as well. It has two poems on it, one of which I won't talk about very much. I will gloss a little bit of Robert Browning's My Last Duchess. Mostly I'm here to talk about Edwin Arlington Robinson's How Annandale Went Out. Before I do, I'd like to thank as well Miles Kuhn and Susan Williamson and Tom Lux and all the rest of the staff and all of you for being here, especially those of you in my workshop. We had a rollicking and wonderful time this morning, although damn you, they all outwrote me. So when I speak of this poem in the opening sentence, I'm speaking of the Robinson poem. Some years ago, I offered this poem in a graduate seminar I teach now and then called Poetic Forms and Modes. I passed copies of the poem around the table, and I could sense, even before anybody said a word, the students' reactions. The poem looks exactly, one is tempted to say, anachronistically like what it is, an Italian sonnet. It's immediately recognizable. The reactions I sensed were a species of world weariness. They were graduate students, after all, and all very young, and they were therefore more than a little jaded and more than a little cynical, particularly about traditional forms. Here we go, they must have thought, the sonnet, that old 14-line warhorse love machine. The fact that the poem is a sonnet would matter formally, yes, but they were mistaken. I wasn't presenting the poem primarily as a formal structure, but as a particular poetic mode, the dramatic monologue. Our study of it would also demonstrate the sonnet's considerable flexibility. It is a little song that can tell a story, or in this case, suggest even more. But I was especially interested in the poem's dramatic and situational complexities. You note right off the question marks. The poem is a spoken thing, a character speaks it. In a play, a monologue is spoken to another character or characters on the stage, whereas a soliloquy is spoken by a character alone on stage, to him or to no one, or to himself or herself, or breaking the fourth wall in some way to the audience, to the universe, to God. I began the discussion with another poem, this other poem, perhaps the most famous of all of Robert Browning's dramatic monologues, My Last Duchess. In Browning's poem, the Duke of Ferrara speaks to an emissary of a count, a man who is there to negotiate the marriage of Ferrara to the count's daughter. Everybody knows this poem, or certainly everybody ought to. It's a magnificent piece of work. In 52 rhymed pentameter lines, Ferrara makes clear to the count's emissary that he has had his last duchess killed because her looks went everywhere, because 'twas all one, my favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, because she had a heart too soon made glad. Therefore, Ferrara gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. He's exceptionally cruel, Ferrara, an elegant, and though he coyly denies it, an eloquent monster. He confesses to murder without actually confessing to murder at all. Then I asked the students to imagine themselves as the count's emissary. What would they do? What could have been their alternatives? Tell the young woman? Tell the father, and in the process slander Ferrara and cut his own throat. Browning's poem is a poem about the testimony of pure power, a power so absolute it could not be withstood. Ferrara could do anything he wanted, and he wanted to let this hapless functionary know it and to feel it. And the reader also feels it. Not only Ferrara's demonic cruelty, but the emissary's hopeless knowledge. Edwin Arlington Robinson, you may not know this, won 3 Pulitzer Prizes for his poems. I believe only Frost, who won 4, had more. Robinson has not fared so well as Frost in the years since, but he was, like Frost, who was 20 years or so younger than Robinson, an absolutely impeccable formalist. And it seems obvious to me that Robinson, like any poet, especially any poet who worked in the formal range, would be fascinated by the enormous tensions within Browning's great poem, most especially the presence of that other character on stage. Here is Robinson's poem, How Annandale Went Out. They called it Annandale, and I was there to flourish, to find words, and to attend. Liar, physician, hypocrite, and friend, I watched him, and the sight was not so fair as 1 or 2 that I have seen elsewhere. An apparatus not for me to mend, a wreck with hell between him, and the end remained of Annandale, and I was there. I knew the ruin as I knew the man, so put the 2 together, if you can, remembering the worst you know of me. Now view yourself as I was, on the spot, with a slight kind of engine. Do you see? Like this. You wouldn't hang me? I thought not. The first line contains 3 pronouns to be parsed. The third I is the easiest. It's the speaker. The first they is, I'm not sure who they is. I think it's them. The culture at large, the legal, moral, and ethical authorities, if you will. You know the people I mean. Them. Which is usually also us. The third pronoun, the middle one, is the most troublesome, it. The first line of the poem suggests that Annandale is an it. By the final line of the first quatrain, however, the reality is revised and made clear. I watched him, says the speaker, and the sight was not so fair. Annandale is, in other words, a man, although he is a man in very dire straits. I was there, the speaker says twice, to flourish, to find words, and to attend. He is also, in the list comprising line 3, a liar, physician, hypocrite, and friend. And in the second quatrain, he tells us what Annandale the man was, taking us back to that opening line's it. He was an apparatus not for me to mend, a wreck with hell between him and the end. A man, in other words, who has become a thing. The speaker is Annandale's friend and physician. The words this speaker finds, the ones that make him a liar, are the words he offers to them, or to perhaps Annandale himself. Whatever it is that has befallen Annandale, terrible accident or awful disease, he is a doomed man, and the speaker's hypocrisy is perhaps both in the words of comfort he offers to his friend, to Annandale, we'll get you through this, buddy. Or maybe to them, the medical establishment, the culture at large, we'll try this, we'll keep him comfortable. These are his lies, or at least they are his first lies. Of course, the greater hypocrisy is the violation of his Hippocratic oath. The sonnet's sestet is his confession, almost as deft as Ferrara's perhaps, but not so gloating nor smug, that he has put his friend Annandale out of his misery with a slight kind of engine, he says. Imagine the hypodermic syringe here, its piston and its cylinder. What I wanted the students in the class to consider was the audience or auditor in this poem. Who is our speaker speaking to? Given the final line, I have always assumed the auditor or auditors to be perhaps a police officer, a judge, maybe even a grand jury. We can't know for sure. It doesn't finally matter, I suppose, but whoever it is, that person or persons now holds in his or its hands the speaker's fate. If you were the auditor, if you were that cop, that judge, I asked the students, what would you do? Robinson's poem consists of exactly 140 syllables, 10 contained and enormously expressive and somewhat under the duress of the situation, cagey syllables per line. There are metrical substitutions, but every line has the appointed 5 stresses. It's also worth noting that it is a wholly traditional Italian sonnet, 2 rhymes in the octave A and B, 3 C, D, and E in the sestet. It is a little song. It's a little song of love about a mercy killing. And in that regard, the fact that the poem is a sonnet is itself a kind of potent irony. It may even be a poem that is primarily about love, a kind of awful love, but love nevertheless. The students in that class were a smart, progressive lot of open-minded souls. They were millennials. A few of them even hailed from states that have laws allowing what we now call assisted suicide. They felt compassion for the speaker. They found his sidelong, not quite confession of his crime moving. At least at first they did. 1 or 2 of them finally lit upon the poem's final line, and it is, in many ways, the poem's most problematic. What, they wondered, was implied by that opening elliptical phrase, like this, ... Someone imagined the speaker holding up a hand and pantomiming the work of a syringe, like this. It comes right after a slight kind of engine, like this. So they imagined that this was a visual demonstration, a pantomime of the means by which Annandale's demise was accomplished. But almost immediately, another student brought up the ambiguity of this first line's pronoun, a demonstrative pronoun, this. What if this is not referring to the pantomimed injection, but to something else? It's difficult, it's ambiguous. No one can say exactly what that this is, right? If it's not a pantomime, what is it? The situation. The speaker's situation, the situation of the poem. They were getting pretty heated by then. They're young, they were enthusiastic. What do you mean, someone demanded. What else could this be? Surely it was the pantomime. No, said the other. It was the situation. Excuse me. The answer, as far as there could or can ever be an answer, was and is in the rest of the line. The central syntactical unit of the final line of this poem is a question. The speaker is asking, and his question is made too, as it has been all through the poem, as everything is said, has been addressed directly to his auditor or auditors. He says, it's a question. You wouldn't hang me? How does one decipher the tone of that question? And what about the tone of the speaker's response? That is, what is the tone of his response both to his own question and to what we might take to be the auditor's silence or inaction? I thought not. Is the tone in I thought not a kind of smugness, the kind almost worthy of Ferrara himself, or is it something else? We might like it to be one or the other, or we might think it could be one of the other, but in fact it is both. Consider, at this point in the poem, it might be said that if there is a man who is suffering, If there is a man who might be called a wreck, with hell between him and the end, might it not be the speaker himself? This self-identified liar, physician, hypocrite, and friend. He killed a friend, a suffering friend. But he was a physician who killed. How might he be mended, this physician who has killed and who has killed a friend? Is it possible the delicacy of his confession, which is, like Ferrara's, never exactly a confession at all, is it possible it is a plea? I thought not may then suggest the speaker's disappointment as well as his satisfaction. He has done in his own mind the right thing, and in doing the right thing, he has made the darkest of marks upon his own soul. As he knew the ruin, as I knew the man, put the two together if you can. This auditor knows him. They are his peers, his fellow citizens. So when he says, so put the two together if you can, remembering the worst you know of me, he's pleading for something. Understanding? Is he asking for understanding also when he inquires, you wouldn't hang me? Is he asking the auditor to hang him, to mend him in the only way he found to mend Annandale? There might be other phrases that support this position, that if you can, for example. Knowing the enormity and the enormous guilt of his own actions, the speaker surely knows that the auditor can put two and two together, so thus can put these two together, the ruin and the man. But the next step in that recognition is momentous and terrifying. They have to kill him. And after all, the speaker's ruin is psychological and spiritual. It's not physical. It's also criminal. His pain is not a body's pain and is therefore more abstract. And then there's line 12. Now view yourself as I was, on the spot. Like the sentence before it, this one's imperative. If you go back and look at Browning's poem, Ferrara is full of imperatives. Come this way, sir. Like the sentence before it, this one's imperative, but on the spot is an interesting and curious phrase. It is itself almost abstract. On the spot's an idiom that suggests two contradictory conditions. One is either on the spot and therefore perfectly placed to do the right thing, or one is on the spot and therefore in a difficult, perhaps even impossible situation. As the speaker was on the spot in confronting Annandale's ruin, so now the auditor is on the spot, and similarly ambiguously. What is the right thing to do in this latest difficult situation? I'm simply suggesting that the poem's final phrase, I thought not, is not Ferrara smug at all, but resigned. The hell between the speaker and the end is one he will have to suffer through, uncondemned, but equally, if differently, doomed. And in this case, the courage, if that's what it was, that he possessed in the face of Annandale's suffering is a kind of courage the auditor cannot or will not muster. I think the mark of this poem's genius has everything to do with the ambiguity of the poem's situation, and even more in the way it is rendered as a monologue. I think it also has to do with the brilliant reversal, or seeming reversal of the roles of power. If in Browning's poem Ferrara is all-powerful, and if in his absolute power he condemns the Count's emissary to silence and to the terrible knowledge that power has imparted, then the situation is wonderfully opposite here. It's the auditor who has the power here, but who cannot or chooses not to employ it. Although As one student said in that class a few years ago, there's a way in which the same sort of curse that Ferrara put upon the Countsman, Robinson has now put upon the Auditor in the Annandale poem. That is to say, the Auditor is now the one who knows about a killing. And the Auditor's choosing or being unable to do anything about it is a curse the Auditor too will have to live with for the rest of his or their lives, just as will the emissary of the Count. Writing is about life, but it really isn't like life. Nobody likes problems in life much, but writing is always a problem, one you create almost happily. The poem's a machine you find a use for. What addicts you to writing is the problem of its difficulty. If it were easy to do well, there wouldn't be much reason for doing it at all. The best poems sniff out and find complexity, the complexity of being a living human being. Such poems can engage with all manner of ethics and morality, with life and death, and with life and death decisions. E.A. Robinson, his reputation so long in eclipse, was sometimes very, very good at that. The fact that it is impossible to determine the precise tone of this poem's final line is part of its richness. And the poem, spoken by that guilty speaker, manages to place at least part of its moral and ethical burden upon the auditor. She who speaks but doesn't, or listens but does not speak. What we love about poetry at this level, which is to say at the level of literature, about this poem and Browning's poem, both, is that we, the readers, are also implicated somehow. We are also the auditors for the time of the poem and its momentary aftermath. We can enter into this situation, we can experience the tensions and complexities of what's going on around us while we're inside it, and of course, we can walk away, or maybe not. Poetry shapes our neural pathways. If the poem does what it's supposed to do, we can walk away, but we will not, or cannot, forget. Thank you.